Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. We're gonna hop right in today because we are on part 3 of render batching. Hopefully this is gonna be our last section. And today we're gonna be working on setting up textures inside of the batched renderer. So yeah, let's just jump right in. So cool. So we left off, we had set up the render batching, so I can actually really quick just do cargo run, and you can see we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on right now. We're running at like 50 frames per second ish. That's with a bunch of input and like other shit that's happening, and we're rendering a little over 10,000 quads. Woo! Cool. So, oh, excuse me. Next thing that we're gonna set up is the actual textures themselves. So what we need to add is a textures vector. And this is going to be a U32 because it is legit gonna, actually no, it really does need to be a texture array, I think, or a vector. And I may come back and change that. So what I'm thinking is the actual way that textures work on the shader side is that you bind you create the texture on the GPU, right? And then you bind that for any specific call, you bind that texture to a slot, a texture slot in the shader. And so in the shader, you're basically just giving it an integer saying, hey, use this slot. This is the texture that we want to use. Or you give it like slot 0. So what we're going to do, this is going to require us to make some changes to the shader also, but we'll do those later. But here we're going to do a let textures as a vec on a texture. Do I want to do it like that? Actually, I think instead of doing it that way, we're not going to include, we should include the textures inside of the context, right? Does it need to be a vector? I know the exact size of this, like a texture is literally just an ID. And so like I know that the size, like this is going to be sized as just an integer for the ID. Let's see if I can just get away with doing like a texture for whatever the maximum is going to be. Let's say 32 for now, right? 32 textures. And then, yeah, we're actually going to say an option on a texture. And so that's going to let me go through option on a texture. Which means that if I don't have it, I don't actually have to set it. I can just set it to none, so I don't need like a default value for the texture or anything. And then down here, after indices, we're going to say textures is going to be none 32. Oops, and then we add a comma. Actually, instead of doing it like that, we're going to say, and we'll fix that. We're going to say let textures as an option texture, with the size of 32 equal none 32. Why do I have, why is trait bound texture copy is not implemented on texture? Really? I thought that that would be implemented. Drive copy clone, because I have to have one to have the other. Boom. Okay, great. So that'll let me do that. And then I'm going to say, that needs to be mutable. Oops. And then we're going to say textures at index 0 is going to be our default texture. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. Equals sum of the default texture. Great. And then, so then here I can just do textures. I don't need the extra bits. Great. Okay. So we've got our like array of textures, or really our array of options. And then we're also going to have a texture count. And that's just going to make my life a little easier. So texture count is also going to be a usize. Great. And then, so we'll come back to the draw quad here in a second. And in flush, we're going to say, I don't need to save the texture count there. However, I need to do, I need to bind all of the textures. Actually, no, I think I can do that in execute, because I need to have the shader activated anyway. So then we're going to say for texture in, let's see, how do I want to do that? Because I've got an array of stuff. Okay, so we're gonna say, we're gonna do this the dummy way first. We're gonna say we're gonna say for I in 0 to context dot textures dot length, which I know is 32, but in case I change it, we'll do it that way. Yeah, so we're gonna say if let some text equal context dot textures at I, right? There we go. Then we've got the texture, so we're gonna say text dot bind. Do I not have the texture? We gotta fix that. Bind should take a slot. New from data, bind is using its slot. Okay, yeah. So no, we want instead for bind to take a slot. So instead of determining the slot when I generate it, which is silly, there should be no slot period. Oh, I guess I do need to. Right? Okay, hold on. I need to double check how I was doing this in the old renderer. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. And I learned nothing, first of all. We're going to do that, and then here we need to do the same thing. We're not going to save the slot. Instead, we're gonna do, let's see, I'm just cleaning up, sorry. And so now we're going to take the slot. We're not using self.slot. Instead, we're just using the slot argument. Boom. And then here, we're just going to always be using texture 0. And yeah, now I need to go back here for a couple of things. First of all, our default texture is going to be angry right here because we gave it a slot and it doesn't want the slot now. And then same for up here when I'm setting the texture here, we also need to do that. Great. Okay, back here. Why is this angry? Renderer 2D context, missing field texture count. Oh yeah. Texture count is 0. Great. Okay, so now we're gonna do text.bind into that as u32. Great. Okay. So text.bind, and then we're gonna say context.shader. Nope. Yeah, okay, so then we're gonna do the slots. Okay, so we're just gonna bind all the textures. But wait. Yeah, okay, I need to do even more research for this. So I need to bind the textures and then upload them to the shader, but if I'm just going to do an array of textures, then I need to okay, so here we're gonna say context.default texture.bind into that slot, right? Oops, I as u32. Okay, and then that way I get something as the default texture. Okay. And then I need to do a let mutable. We're gonna say text slots be a u32 with the same 32 equals 0 32. Then here we're gonna say that's for each. Let's say text slots at index I equals I as u32. And then we do context.shader dot set uniform int array. Let's do this first. The name is texture slots. And our value here is gonna be text slot. And this should be int array, which does not exist. And so now we're gonna go to our shader program. And let's see, GL uniform array. Okay. So that's program create to do some mats will be assigned. Okay. Okay, friends, I am back. I don't remember if I actually said that I was leaving or not. So yeah, let's continue what we were doing. So we're gonna make our unsafe function set uniform int array, which is gonna take that. The name is gonna be string. We take our values here, which is going to be a U32 array, and we're going to take our count, which is going to be a usize, right? So then from there, actually I should be able to just grab both of those. But yeah, let's see. So then I'm going to get the uniform location. That should still be fine. And then this is going to be 1IV. Ooh, hello. 1IV. So then we're going to take, we got our location. Our count is going to be count as I32. And then our values, what is it going to be? Values dot as pointer dot cast, right? And then, okay, so now we're going to go back to here. We get our text slot, and then our count here is going to be context dot texture count, right? So we're only uploading that many. We can make that a reference. Okay, so our texture count is there. Or actually, I guess. Okay, so first off, let's have a constant here. So we're going to say const max textures usize equals 32, right? And then here, can I do max textures here? Or is it going to give me an error that it's not defined yet? Oh, wonderful. Okay, cool. And then, cool. So, that's fine. This just needs to be max textures. And so does this one. Right, okay, still looking good. Alright, so we've got that. Here's another fun thing, is we really can do this when we start the scene. Like, basically, as soon as we get the... I mean, we already have the shader. Theoretically, I could even do this on init, so I don't even have to do it every frame. Let's do that. Cool. Alright, so here's what we're going to do, is we're going to say, oh really, I can just have this be a, we're going to say for I in 0 to max textures, right? We're gonna do it like this. Then we're gonna say, whoops. Let's do let mute text map, no, not map, texture slots equal, and this is gonna be a U32 for max textures equals, make that 0. I'm sorry. Can I just define, whoa, hold on. Can I just define that? Well, yeah, it will let me do that, great. Then we're gonna say texture slots at index I equals I, right? That's I as U32. Then here we go, texture slots isn't initialized, wonderful. That's 032. Whoa, what did I just do? Oh, nothing, it just scrolled on me a little bit. Okay, so 032, then we're just setting everything. Okay, so essentially now we have an array that has 32 items and it's 0 to 31. So this is going to be our, because we already got our shader. So do I have the shader activated already? Like higher up here? Nope, just created it. Great. Okay, so here we're gonna do shader dot activate and shader dot set uniform int array, and it's gonna be texture slots, right? And then we're going to give it the texture slots array, and our count is going to be max textures. Beautiful. This needs to be a reference. Wonderful. Okay, now let's go back down here. So I don't need this because this is literally like I could make it a constant, like it is just the texture slots. It's always going to be 0 to 31 or 0 to whatever max textures is, right? So for each, oops, let's do that. So for each texture in 0 to content.textures.length. Okay, so theoretically, here I could do context.textureCount, right? And so that should only let me grab the textures that we have, because up here in draw, which we are going to do now, we are going to say, okay, text ID here is set to 0. So instead, we're going to say let mutable text ID equals 0, right? So we're going to say if let some text equal texture. So this is going to unwrap and let us have our texture. And if we don't have a texture, we're going to use the default texture, which is bound to 0, right? And then, sorry, my brain is jumping all over the place. Hey, I'm wrapping. That's why I moved earlier, because I did that. Okay, cool. All right, so my actual textures, I have the default texture set there. Our texture count here actually needs to be 1, because we're always going to have at least the default texture, right? So we're going to say text ID is 0 here. Here we're going to say text ID, oops, let's do that for all of those. Okay, So now we're going to say, we're going to look through our textures, and we're going to say for text for I in, we're going to start at 1 because we already have our default texture, right? We know that we're not going to be providing the default texture. So we have our default texture. We're going to say for I in our singular 1. So we're skipping the first. We're starting at the first index 1, which is the second slot. Okay, so from the second slot on, we're going to go up to context dot texture count. So we're going to go for as far as we have added textures up to this point, and we're going to say if context dot textures. Actually, we're going to say if let some existing text equal context dot textures at index I. So if we have a texture there, which we should for each of them, then we're going to say if if existing text dot ID equals our current texture. So we're going to say text dot ID. And so what that means is, this is a lot of like unwrapping and sums and things like if let sums and all that. So what we're doing is we're making sure that we were actually provided a texture. If we weren't provided a texture, we're going to use the default, which means we need to use the text ID of 0. So if we were given a texture, then what we're going to do is loop through all of the textures we currently have other than the default texture, because we know that we're not being provided the default texture. And then if that texture, which should exist, so like this, I could just do unwrap here, but I would rather do the if let sum, just because that's a little better. And also, if for some reason it is set to none, then we're gonna just like fucking later we're gonna bind the default texture to that. It'll be fine. Anyway, so if we have that texture, and that texture is the same as the texture that we're currently been given, at least as far as the GPU is concerned, because we're comparing like the raw renderer IDs. If that exists, then we're going to say text ID here is going to equal I. And otherwise, the text ID will be 0. Okay, now we have an issue, which is type of the binding is wrong. Expected U32. Text ID does need to be a U32 here, which means this needs to be I as U32. Right? Okay, and then we set our texture. Okay. So, texture ID is being set now. We are flushing, and then here we have activated the shader. We're going through all of our textures that we currently have, and we are binding each of them to that slot. That actually doesn't even need to be here because I don't have to do anything with the shader. So instead, that is going to go here, right? Actually, maybe here. Okay, so we're going through all of our indices, or we're going through every index in our texture array up to the number of textures that we've been given, and we are going to make sure that that texture exists, that it's set to some and not none, and if it is set to some, we're going to bind that in that slot, otherwise we're going to bind the default texture in that slot. One thing that I forgot to do up here to avoid continuously doing that, we're going to say context.texture count equals context.texture count plus 1. And that's going to keep us incrementing those, and then down here in flush, we're going to do context.texture count equals 1, because we're always going to have the default texture. Cool, and then yeah, I mean, that theoretically should work. Let's just, actually, let me, real quick, just make sure I've saved that. And then cargo run. We're going to have some issues. No textures, which makes sense. And that is because we need to actually edit the shader itself. So let's do edit. Let's bring that in. Projects, main, shaders. I want quad dot vert first. So we've got our text ID, towards color. Those are all being passed through. Oh, great. Okay. Edit home Alkahest shaders, and we want the quad dot frag. So we're bringing in the texture coordinates, the texture ID, and the frag color. So here we're going to say our uniform sampler ID. I believe I called it texture slots. And it would be nice if I could sync that up without needing the constant there, but that's fine. So here it's going to be, what is it, texture, right, texture. We're going to do texture slots, whoops, if I could spell, texture slots at index text ID. And then we give it the text coords, and we're going to multiply that by frag color. Okay. Let's see what happens. Oh my god. Okay, so I warped the things, but didn't actually, you know, do the, like that's not what that's supposed to look like. Okay, so let's go back to our texture. Texture, I've got it set up properly, like we're binding on a specific slot. Shader program, that seems like it should work, at least. Then at that point, let's go back here. Okay, so something's going weird with my logging, because like if you look here, it's tried to activate an unregistered shader program. Oh, okay. That is a problem. So our shader program ID is 0. It's like it didn't get built properly. Oh, I bet if I go all the way up here that there's an error because the shader did not compile properly, which means that I've got some sort of issue. And that's not a good sign. Okay, how much further is it going to make me go? Come on now. I really need to set up like text logging so I can just look at the file. Seriously? Okay, you know what? We're gonna do that. Boom. As fast as I could. Oop, okay, here we go. Error while linking shader program. Okay, so it did not seem to want to link it, but I don't know why. Okay, let's go. Let's look at our 2.1. Okay, back to Here we got our position, text coords, text ID, color. And then we're sending out the text coords, the text ID, and the frag color. Text coords, text ID, frag color. Okay. Then 222 here. We're bringing in text coords, text ID, frag color. We have an array here of the. Am I not getting the actual log from, let's see, project metadata, okay, still angry, sending the batches, yeah, okay, so it's not giving me any kind of log information. I can go fix that in a second. Okay, then let's just, before we do anything else, we're just going to comment this out, right? And we're going to go back to just using the frag color and see what happens, right? So if I do cargo run here, everything looks fine. It doesn't look like I'm getting my issues at all because that's commented out. Texture slots, index of text ID, text coords, frag color. What is the, let me bring up another one here. Alkahest main.vert. What about main.frag? Yeah, okay, I'm not bringing in a texture there either. Okay, that doesn't help. Cool, I'm gonna pause this real quick and I'm gonna do a little bit more debugging and I will see you guys in a few minutes. Hi friends, it's me. It is literally the next day. I've been working on this bug for so long. So here's the deal. I'm not gonna show any code. I'm just gonna talk about what actually is going on. Turns out that in OpenGL, you cannot use an integer variable to index into an array of sampler 2Ds in the shader. I tried a bunch of different versions of that. Like I tried using a flat variable, which means that it only uses the data from the principal vertex, which would be the first vertex of each like triangle of the quad. And that also didn't work, just because it was a variable. And so like I even tried like just using a static number and like the textures work. Textures don't work with the variable, but at least with the flat it compiled. I don't know. So here's what we're gonna do. Is two things. First of all, where I'm going to like basically just table the 2D renderer for a couple of reasons. First, the 2D renderer has been a bit more complex than I was planning, especially with the advent of this texture issue. Everything up to this has been pretty smooth. But I realized that as I was working on this, that what I'm making right now is like a generalized 2D renderer. But my plan currently is for Alkahest to primarily be a 3D engine. The point of the 2D renderer was just for UI. And so like I'm trying to make this generalized thing that can like dynamically accept textures and like pick the right one and do all this stuff and batch all this together. And I don't really need that for UI, you know, like so what I'm going to do is I'm going to table the renderer 2D currently. Like it's going to stay in the code. It'll be present, and I'm going to put like a little disclaimer that it's not actually being used currently and is like partially complete. Specifically because the essentially, like, in the future, I might come back and say, hey, I want to make a 2D game, at which point I will, like, complete the 2D renderer. And I've got ideas for how to do that. I've, like, got notes written down, so, like, it's not like I'm just throwing away the renderer and the things about the renderer that are in my brain currently. Like, for example, like, when I do eventually, if and when I do eventually revisit the renderer 2D, it's gonna, my solution for the texture issue is gonna either be to, like, dynamically create a texture atlas for the batch, and that will be, like, rendered to a frame buffer that then is used as the texture, and, like, you adjust the texture coordinates so that everything is rendering properly, or using a texture 2D array, which both have their drawbacks. The rendering to a frame buffer that is used as, like, a texture atlas adds an extra step that could potentially, like, slow things down. Using the texture 2D array requires that all the textures be the exact same dimensions, which means that I essentially have to either have multiple texture 2D arrays, which then we have the exact same problem, or I basically just scale all of the smaller textures up so that they're all the same size as the bigger texture. Or I have wasted space and I have to adjust my texture coordinates. So yeah, got some not great options, essentially. But here's what we're going to do. I'm going to, like, this video, like, all this time up to me working on the textures, like, this is all getting uploaded. And instead, we're going to pivot to working on a dedicated UI renderer. And I already have ideas for how that's going to be set up. Like, so the next video is going to be creating that, and hopefully it will only take, like, one video, because the bulk of it's going to be font rendering. So the way that that's going to be set up, at least right now while it's in my brain, once it's actually, like, code on a screen, it will probably change. But the way that it's going to be set up is the UI renderer is going to batch by UI panel, basically. So each UI panel will have, like, a texture for the background that is statically, like, uploaded to the shader. And it will have the potential, as the UI gets more complex, for, like, a static texture atlas that it uses for doing any other textures that it needs to draw. And the reason I say static is because as I'm creating the actual Alkahest game, I'm going to be designing these panels, and there's only going to be, like, a specific set number, like a discrete set of textures that I'm going to need for a given panel. So each panel is going to have its own texture atlas, or maybe I'll have, like, a global texture atlas, I don't know, for the UI. Either way. But then, so each panel will be its own batch, right? But for right now, we're going to go for, like, the bare bones, most basic UI renderer, and what that is going to be is a rectangle with either a color or a texture or both, and text. So that's going to be the next video. I really hope you guys show up for that. I still need to do more work on, like, font rendering research. I found a couple of really good resources that I'm currently going through. But yeah, so that is basically where I am, what's going on. I am probably going to go ahead and get started on the font, or not the font, but on the UI renderer. Like, I'm gonna set that up and start recording that, because that's, at least the beginning of that is going to be pretty simple. Because it's going to mostly be, like, exactly the same as the current renderer, but simpler. Anyway, okay, cool. So that's all I got for this video. For anybody that was hoping for, like, this awesome conclusion to textures, I'm sorry. That I just realized that, like, that's not the direction that I want to be going in at the moment. Eventually, I'm hoping that I'll revisit that for whatever reason, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!